Hey, hey, hey! So we are back for another book review. I've had a big summer of reading books. Well, not really a summer, more like late summer. But anyway, so I just got done reading Sleeping Beauties by Stephen King and his son, Owen King. I have to say, well, first let's go ahead and read the synopsis, shall we? In a future so real and near it might be now, something happens when women go to sleep. They become shrouded in a cocoon-like gauze. If they are awakened, if the gauze wrapping their bodies is disturbed or violated, the women become feral and spectacularly violent. And while they sleep, they go to another place, a better place, where harmony prevails and conflict is rare. Because there are no men. I added that. Wasn't in the book. One woman, the mysterious Eve Black, is immune to the blessing or curse of the sleeping disease. Is Eve a medical anomaly to be studied, or is she a demon who must be slain? Abandoned, left to their increasingly primal urges, the men divide into warring factions, some wanting to kill Eve, some wanting to save her. Others exploit the chaos to wreak their own vengeance on new enemies. All turn to violence in a suddenly all-male world. Set in a small Appalachian town whose primary employer is a women's prison, Sleeping Beauties is a wildly provocative, gloriously dramatic father-son collaboration that feels particularly urgent and relevant today. So, after reading that, it's a very interesting book. It was kind of difficult for me to get into because there are 3 parts. There is 20 chapters in the first part, 17 chapters in the second part, and I think maybe 1, 2, or 3 chapters in the third part. I couldn't remember. There's not very much in the last one. It's a very thick book. It took me about 2 weeks to read this. I'm a huge Stephen King fan. I love Stephen King. And I saw this book, and my favorite Disney movie is Sleeping Beauty. That's my favorite fairy tale. I love that one. So obviously Stephen King wrote Sleeping Beauties. I was very, very intrigued. When I pick out a book, I don't necessarily read the synopsis. I go by the cover, or, I don't know. Sometimes I read a little bit about it, like on the back or something, but usually I don't. Usually I just kind of, if it catches my eye, I grab it, and that's really never failed me. I mean, maybe a couple of times, but for the most part, I end up with books that I end up loving, So I didn't really know what this was about at first. They have so many characters. In fact, I will show you. Okay, so we have, this is the first page of characters, okay? And then you have all of these characters. And this is the actual start of the book. There's a lot of characters, and the chapters are structured in such a way, so you have part 1, they have little, there's chapter 1, and then there's part 1, and then you have, part 2. So each little section is a different person's part of the story. So there's different chapters, but within the chapters, there's different points of view. So you see it from different points of view. There's the main character, her name is Lila, she's the sheriff. Her husband Clint is the psychologist at the women's prison. And so they have different perspectives, and their son, but the chapters are intense, but it's extremely, I don't want to say, it's intense, it's involved. But once you get to reading it, you pick it up pretty quickly. I mean, like I said, each little section is for a different character. It's a different point of view. It's a different mindset. It's a different way of seeing, what's happening. And some chapters have 15 little sections. Some chapters don't have as many. But it's very interesting throughout the book. to see how the characters develop. That's something that always intrigues me with books, is to see if the character at the beginning of the book is the same as the character at the end of the book, and very rarely, if it's a good author, very rarely is the person the same. You know, they grow and they change. They learn things, just like when you watch like TV and movies and stuff like that. Usually, you know, they grow and become more developed. You know, they become more improved versions of themselves. So this book was very, very interesting. It does not have a lot of sex in it, although I will give a warning. There is sexual assault in this book. It's minor sexual assault. Like, there's no penetration. It's not penetrative assault, okay? But there is sexual assault in here. You know, in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, it is men working at a women's prison, so I kind of think that probably happens more often than we hear about, unfortunately. I think we've all watched prison dramas, you know, Orange is the New Black, or Wentworth, which is the Australian... It's kind of the Australian version of Orange is the New Black, but Wentworth is a little bit better. Anyway, they're both each their own, you know, different things. But if you've watched either one of those, then you kind of understand that, you know, some men that work at a women's prison take advantage of their position, and 100% they take advantage of it. And it happens. So there are sections like that. They're not marked. You can kind of foresee like when something is going to happen. So I will say that. Other than that, there's very, very minor sexualness in the book. There is some gore, but most of it is just... The part that bothered me the most is some of the men's attitudes towards women. And I have to say, it's a very intriguing look at the world in which only the men would occupy it, right? So let's say women, and it doesn't matter what your position is as a woman, like whether you're a homemaker, whether you're a lawyer, whether you are a doctor, whether you are the vice president of the United States. Like, if you fall asleep, you go into a cocoon, right? So you're still alive, but you're not conscious, kind of a thing. And so the men are having to figure out how to take care of their kids. They're having to figure out how to do things that the women do, because otherwise they won't get done. And likewise, in the they call it the other place, the women are having to do all of these things that the men do, right? And having to figure out how to do... I don't want to say that it's like men's jobs and women's jobs, but like, I feel like if you're not an electrician and you're left in a world where, let's say you're married to an electrician, okay? Your husband's very, very good at electricity and fixing things and all that kind of stuff, and you go to a world where there's nothing like that, you kind of, when you're married to somebody who's good at that, you get used to having probably higher tech stuff, probably better stuff, you know, stuff gets fixed and they can improve it and things like that. And when you go to another world, like, you kind of have to learn how to do that all on your own, you know? You have somebody who's really good at it, so that just becomes their part in the relationship, is that they just handle issues with that. And it's very interesting to see how the men and the women reacted. And I will say one of the most touching parts of the story is when one of the younger girls, because there are girls of all ages over in the other world, right? Just like there are men of all ages, there are boys and men in the world after the women fell asleep. Well, one of the girls, she was like 12 or 13, maybe a little bit younger than that. She was over at her friend's house in the other world with the women, and they made a point to say that she walked home. It was night. It was like late at night, dark outside, and she walked home without being afraid at all. Because there are no P words there. And there were no men. There was nobody. There was no reason for her to be afraid. And like, if, I don't know. I want to say if you're a parent, that's really going to hit you. If you're a woman, that's really going to hit you. I think it really says a lot, and I think that's very, very true. And I think it's quite sad, you know, as women, what we grow up having to deal with and having to learn how to do, and things that we learn how to handle that maybe, you know, young women shouldn't have to learn how to handle. I mean, grown men should be able to handle themselves, period. But I just thought that yeah, I mean, I don't think I really need to say much more about that, but it was interesting some of the struggles that the men had, because it, you know, and the women in the other place, some of them were like, you know, oh, the men, they're just going to devolve and they just want to control everything because they've been hurt by men, right? And so they're like, oh, well, you know, they're just going to do this or they're going to do that. And on some levels they were right. You know, the men couldn't really get along without the women, you know, without their wives. And I think part of it is that the wives hold the family together. And I think the other part of it is when you're in love with somebody and it's like that's your spouse, that's your life partner, and you lose them, you kind of, you get sad, right? You get like depressed, especially in this situation where they're not dead. They're just not there. You know, you can see their body, you can see them breathing, they're alive. They're just not conscious. So you can't talk to them. You can't rely on them. You can't ask advice from them. And, you know, I think there's a little bit of emotionality that goes along with that. But it's a very interesting take on what would happen if there were no women in the world. And I think another thing that was interesting to me is that the men brought up that, you know, with all the sperm banks in the world, the women on the other side, they could continue to populate the earth. They could go to sperm banks and they can, you know, have babies. And they were having male babies. There was a couple of them that went over that were pregnant and they would have male babies. And, you know, so the men were like, yeah, well, they can repopulate the world. We can't. We can't. There's nothing we can do. So once the women are gone, we're just going to slowly die out. And it's a very interesting book. I mean, on many, many different levels, but I thought the cover was really beautiful too. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of Stephen King. I haven't read anything by Owen King, but a collab between, you know, father and son. It's a really good book, you guys. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. Highly, highly, highly recommend this book. It is a thick, thick book. It's going to take you a minute to read. It's a little complex to understand at some points as far as when you're getting it, when you're starting to read it, and all the different characters and the points of view. I did not read the character pages, by the way. I didn't go through and read who the characters were. I just started the story because I'm kind of like, I'm not going to understand who these people are until I start reading the story. And then I can put it together in my head. And if I have questions, you can always refer back to the beginning of the book in the character list. But I'm going to give this book a 5 out of 5 stars. Absolutely loved this book. Which is no surprise. I mean, Stephen King is such a horror genius, and I feel like this is such a... It's so well written, you know, and it's a take on our society, and it's kind of like, there's nothing like super scary in this. This isn't like, you know, Cujo, where there's a terrifying dog. This isn't like It, where it's a clown. This is just a society where women are disappearing and the men kind of have to fend for themselves, you know, and the women too in the other place when they arrive in the other place, which is kind of hard to understand. I realized that because it was kind of hard for me to understand, but it's about the middle of the book when they start talking about the women and giving their points of view from where they're at. So it's definitely different. There's, I mean, obviously a horror element to it, but it's different from other Stephen King novels. So if you are like, well, I really want to read Stephen King, but I don't want to get scared, this is a good book. You know, yeah. So I'm going to rate this 5 out of 5. Let me know if you have read this book before, if you liked it. If you didn't like it, let me know everything down in the comments below. Like this video if you like this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. Ring that bell icon to get notified whenever I upload a new video, because you never know what kind of content is going to pop up over here on this channel. I thank y'all so much for watching. I love y'all very, very much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!